Welcome to B2B Craftworks, a podcast about B2B writing. Good morning, business writers. When I was first marketing and becoming a marketing writer, I gave a pretty hard side eye to the client style guide my marketing manager slid over to me on the desk. And it seemed kind of silly that they're telling me a brand's voice was modern and fun when they were servicing vending machines around the town. Modern servicing, I don't know. But as part of the learning process of becoming a writer, especially in B2B, I kind of got over myself and I used that style guide. I ended up shaping it. I added to it. I worked with a designer and we made it something really beautiful. But instead of leaving that as yet another mysterious part of the B2B writing process, today we get to talk to Hillary Weiss from Statement Piece Marketing about brand voice. So Hillary, the first thing I was hoping to hear from you, someone with a lot of experience around brand voice, is your honest opinion of what you'd say is the best thing about brand voice and the worst thing about brand voice.
Oh, this is a good one. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. The best thing about, I'll start with the easy part. I think the best thing about brand voice is that it is such a fun and joyful creative challenge as a writer. Even if somebody isn't quite clear on their brand voice yet, like creating that clear identity and almost, especially for B2B when it's not necessarily a person, and creating that identity and that kind of connection and that character almost can just be such a joy. And it also really gives a purpose and weight to all of the messaging. It's almost like a vehicle for everything the business is wanting to share and all the experiences they're wanting to create for the customers. So it's just, it's so much fun. And I love to geek out about it. I think my least favorite thing about brand voice, is there's a lot of conversation now in marketing, right, about being human-centric. Like, we speak human. We are marketing for humans. It's like, all right, who else is marketing for? The bots? No. But I think the risk with that is that you have some companies feeling like they've created a great customer experience because their brand voice is friendly. And that's it. Like, you send funny emails and you have like a friendly voice on your website. And so clearly you must be creating great experiences for customers. Not so. That's such a totally different ballgame in terms of how people interact with the product, how many times you're upselling them through the process, all of these things. I think it's sometimes people feel like it's a shortcut to familiarity and connection, when in reality, it's really just one piece of the puzzle. Maybe the most fun piece, but one piece all the same.
Yeah, I love the energy you have about it already, because I think as an agency writer, and I'll talk a little bit more about how your relationship with brand voice might change depending on what kind of writing you do. Sometimes I could probably be a little jaded about, another style guide. Yay, this will be fun. But to think of to actually step into that and take ownership of not just writing words, but being that conveyor of a brand's messaging and who they are and stuff. I don't know. That's really energetic to me.
Voice is a vehicle, baby.
So could you tell us some of your experience with brand voice, or just kind of?
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite stories around brand voice and tone, and this is actually a service-based, this is B2C, but I love telling the story anyway. So back in the early days of my career, I was working with this woman by the name of, we'll call her Rachel because that's her name, but I won't give her last name. I won't rat her out. But I met her, probably 2013. And I remember she was a health coach, and I went to her site, and it was this lovely, standard issue wellness coach site for 2013. So there's she's holding the green smoothie, looking off into the distance, and she's frolicking on the beach for reasons unknown. Wearing white. Yeah, absolutely. And it was use food to reduce inflammation and live your best life. All of these kind of Oprah-isms that were really finding their way into online communications and marketing copy at the time. So I remember being okay, kind of standard issue health coach. And then I got on the phone with her, and it was a completely different person. She was like, what up? What's going on? Blah, blah, swearing, black leather jacket, all black, wearing Philly Beastie Boys blasting kind of woman. And I was like, who is this, first of all? And it was so interesting because we started having these conversations, and I sort of asked her, I was like, look, there's got to be honest with you, there's a disconnect between what's on your site and what I'm seeing right now, and that can be a bait and switch for the customer, and that can be an issue. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you seem so kind of guarded on your site copy? And the concern was that people aren't going to see her as professional, all the fears, like people aren't going to feel connected to her if she swears, people aren't going to like what she has to say about burning the diet books, and like really, really fiery kind of point of view about all of this. And she looked at me and she was like, and I said, what if we wrote your copy like that? What if that was the core messaging? Like, what if this burn the diet books, F the diet industry, all these things you're telling me now that are coming across on your site, like, what if that was the core of your message? And she was basically like, I can do that. I said yes. And so it's actually been really wonderful because afterwards her business really, really blossomed. She does qualify, I believe, as B2B now because she sells essentially, she works with other wellness coaches and sells like a wellness business in a box almost, where you can get products and challenges and all of that. That was her business model for a number of years. And that's kind of been the baseline for her messaging. It's really been this radical kind of tough, I don't want to say bad girl, but badass kind of approach to talking about wellness and having these conversations. And it's really resonated with people, has helped so many more people connect with her, and has just really created a powerful community around her message. And I think that is what brand voice, when done right, really does. It sends out kind of a homing signal for people that they belong there, or alternatively that they don't, because a great brand voice allows the right people to self-select in and the wrong people to self-select out.
And I can only imagine, this might not be super on topic, but from that founder perspective of being allowed to be yourself online, like how much that had to influence her growth and ability to, move into the B2B space and have confidence in what she's doing because it was working and it was her. So that is so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just really, it was a light bulb moment for me too, because it seemed obvious to me as well. Because when you work in copywriting and you see so much of the same language over and over again, when you work in branding, creative direction, all these things they do, it's just very much like, how could you not want to do that? Like, are we seeing the same industry? Like, are we checking out the same cookie cutters here? Like, what's going on? But it is such a special thing that we have that freedom, especially in the online space. That's sort of the hidden blessing of a saturated industry, is that when you have a clear message told in a really distinct way, like, you can't help but stand out.
And I think I'm hearing our definition of brand voice is that when people look at your website and call you, they don't say, who is this?
Yeah,
and you start to talk. So I love that.
Absolutely. And it's similar for, for B2B or even for product-based businesses, let's say. Like, if you have a really, really luxury kind of tone on your site, and then you get an order and it's just like jiggling around the package, it's dusty, it's dented, like, woo, what a disconnect there for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So when we start to think about what writers need to know about brand voice, I think one of the ways I wanted to frame this conversation is around how your writing role, so whether you're an agency writer, in-house, or freelancing, can kind of change that conversation or your responsibility with brand voice. And it seems like when you're in-house, there's a bigger responsibility to really own it and become the mouthpiece of it, and just know every internal detail of it because you are that brand. Whereas when you move into the agency space, you might have 10 to 15 different clients, different voices you're trying to speak to, versus freelance, where I think it's going to be more around the 5 to 10, like less than agency, but you're still going to be juggling multiple people. Do you have any thoughts on kind of that responsibility or how it changes your value?
How to smoothly move between voices? Yeah. So for me, I think like at any given time, so during my wilder days, in terms of workload, I was probably juggling between 8 and 12 clients at a time. And I've been self-employed for, the entire time I've been a writer. And for me, the key was really getting to understand it, where you sort of fall off is if you don't understand the product and the mission behind it. Really taking the time, my process personally is very collaborative. There's a lot of interviews, a lot of discussion, a lot of intake, and a lot of research. Just so I can really get a grip on what is happening within the company, what their ultimate goals are, how they want to be positioned in the market, how they want their clients to see them, how they see themselves, all of that stuff, the quality of the product, the nature of the product or the offer, all of these things. And I think what has been where I would make mistakes sometimes was if it would be like, okay, well, this person's kind of funny, so we have like the comedy category, and we have the creative category, and we have the serious category. But while that's generally like, you can definitely play to those kind of tones, where the greatest copy comes from is a really deep understanding of the product, how people respond to it, how they see themselves. So really taking the time to kind of dig and take a ton of notes. I take notes like a transcriptionist for this reason. There's no shorthand. I mean, there's a lot of typos, but there's no shorthand.
Right.
Because I record everything and I listen back, because often talking to the founder of a company, you know, if you're working in an organization that's not, maybe doesn't have a person at the forefront, the tone of the founders often can play into the brand voice, the nature of the experience they're looking to create, all of that. So being clear on how all of that works, having notes, having a clear reference point. This is why I think copywriters make such great messaging strategists naturally, because they can kind of see the whole ecosystem. But really taking the time to understand the client, understand the offer, understand the service, understand the customer experience. It's actually really hard to get thrown off course when you have a clear understanding of that. Because it's not just, okay, this person's supposed to be funny, like this brand is supposed to be funny, and this brand is supposed to be luxurious, and this brand is supposed to be like serious and professional. It's okay, well, we are selling to, you know, millennials between the ages of 28 and 40, and they live in here, and they this is supposed to be a real alternative to a normal service and all of that. So it's just a really exciting and kind of interesting, it's an interesting challenge, but it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. What the whole point is really clarity of understanding, having a deep connection to the business, and then you really can't go wrong.
I'm just so in love with that, because I feel like this is something you probably take for granted as somebody with insane amounts of experience, that you have to have that information to do a good job. But when you're first coming into B2B writing, I think you're more on the attitude of, yeah, I can write about that. And then you and you check it off the list. And that's why you end up being a writer monkey, where it's like $50 an article, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
But if you are coming to a job interview and you're like, here are the past 12 blogs you've had, like they don't align with your brand voice. What are you guys doing about that? And you can talk to that strategy level or see why that matters for a customer. It's just like, bam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just next level.
It's so interesting too, because I think, especially in the freelance space, this happens, is that when people have a good natural writing style, like if their blog is funny, or if they, you know, have like, they are posting on social media and they're not technically a copywriter, but they get approached by brands who want a similar kind of tone, it can actually be very confusing. If you're a good writer naturally, if you kind of came into the industry with the ability to write, you can squeak by for a long time. Like just sort of writing like yourself, but under the umbrella of these organizations. But where the higher level stuff, as you say, starts coming in, where the value is in your ability to understand and use brand voice to enhance the sales conversation, as opposed to just have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so this reminds me of a theory I have, and I promise I didn't Google you or look into finding out the answer to this question.
Is it a
Do you have any kind of theater background or interest in theater?
That is so funny. So yes and no. I have a theater background, but I was never very good at singing and dancing. I thought I was great at it, but I actually, this is so funny because I have an email coming out about this later this week. Because I maybe revisit my high school experience. I would always audition for every show. You know, I'd be there belting out all that jazz for the spring musical and like doing a glass menagerie monologue for the fall play. But I never got the lead. I was always in like the background of the choir, and I was always in you know, I always got like the weird semi-small part of the fall play where they're like, no one but you can play this part. I was like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you, but I appreciate the compliment. And so, yes, and I did one play in college that I actually really enjoyed, but I also didn't talk the whole time until I had a long monologue. the last 5 minutes of the show. So.
Well, you were probably meant to play lead in your life, so you don't want to waste it in high school.
See, I like that interpretation. Couldn't waste that front of line energy. But no, I come from a family of my whole family is like very theatrical and very silly and animated. And where my love of writing actually began is my sister. We had this manual typewriter. You're not asking for this story, but I'm going to tell you. My sister we had this manual typewriter growing up. This is before we got like a computer and stuff. Or before, like, I guess Word for us, I don't know. Anyway, and my sister would write these parodies, these fairy tale parodies that she called Fruit Loop tales. And they were very funny. And she was like,
that's so cool.
She must have been like 12. And she would just write pages and pages and pages. We have them somewhere. And I just would watch her do that. And I loved writing too. You know, I kept the diary since I could hold a pen. I'm sure that's true for so many writers. And I just remember reading these and being like, I could do this. And so I started kind of following in her footsteps and like writing parodies and writing stories. And I wrote fan fiction when I was a teenager and like all of this stuff. So writing was always a part of it. But in terms of like the sheer personality and humor, like all my family.
That's cool. Well, you've told your sister that she started your career, right?
I did. And she was surprised. It's funny how like little you remember. Like I was like, yeah, I used to, she was a big sister. So like used to beat me up growing up, but also you inspired my writing career. He's a great writer. So is my brother. We're just a very verbal family, you might say. Yeah.
Okay, then I think it's moving into a scientific theory now.
There we go.
But I was at Content Marketing World, or whatever the conference is called, which I feel bad for forgetting now. But it was in DC last year, and we were all sitting around at the volunteer table, and someone else started talking about brand voice, and I asked them the same question. And I'm starting to get the sense that people who can really get into brand voice and like have that as a specialty or a strength as a writer, they always have this theater background because they're so used to getting into a character's mentality and then expressing that in words. So like the length of your sentences, the types of word you're using, you're just kind of aware of that because you have this, connection in that way. I don't know.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think
because I did playwriting. Not so much on the stage until recently with improv, but
that's awesome.
Just the same ideas. 10,000% recommend looking up local improv troupe because I do identify as a introvert, but it's amazing.
It's good for you. Yeah, all my introverts, so many, like all the improv people I know are introverts. It's really fun. It's just like a fun, it's a safe space to continue to play.
It is, and it felt like, I'm in 201 now, so it's a lot more about acting, and that's super uncomfortable. But
acting.
It really, really is uncomfortable, that is. But the first ones, it just felt like you're walking into a room and you like play crosswords with people in a room. It just feels like more of a mental puzzle than anything else.
Yeah, definitely.
So, totally recommend. But anyway, talk about tangents. I think one other thing that I was hoping to get across with brand voice for B2B writing is, it adds this second degree thing that Chris Gillespie talks a lot about, where it's not just between you and the brand, but it's you, the brand, and the audience.
Yeah.
So you need to know the voice of the audience as well as the company who's speaking to that audience. So it's like, it's
confusing,
really
right?
Yeah. And I, from the perspective of, I recently did a piece in the e-commerce space, and that brand was just so excited to have anyone who knew anything about e-commerce. Because so often when they bring writers on board, they have to train about the audience and the industry, and then you need to train about the company. So it's like you're layering on. So I think my subversive pro niche stance, that comes in there too, because it helps you with that brand voice.
Absolutely.
Cool. So with some basics out of the way, I thought we could work through kind of your process for when you first join up with a company. Let's assume they have no style guide ready for you, but they're attracted to your amazing website, Statement Piece Studio, to get a brand voice of their own. It seems like you kind of got this down. So how do you start them off? How would you walk them through that process?
So it's funny. I've had the privilege of working with so many different kinds of companies, with personal brands, service-based, SaaS, B2B, all of this great stuff. And it always starts the same way. which is I personally start with a really in-depth intake form called the Brand Voice Brief, which really assesses those kind of three things you were talking about, which are the three categories, which are the company themselves, the audience, and then the way that the audience interacts with the organization. And I think that's so important because a big thing that I think a lot of companies miss when they think about brand voice, they think about messaging, they think about what their audience needs to know. So they need to know that this course or this program has 150 hours of video. It's like, and then when you're in the audience, they're like, oh God, no, I barely have enough time to eat breakfast, leave me alone. But rather through the lens, they need to be talking through the lens of what their consumer and customer finds relevant and what's going to be most valuable to them, which is, as an alternative to 150 hours of video, like a library of bonus videos that you can access anytime about subjects like ABC.
There you go.
But as I mentioned before, my process is quite collaborative. So we have the intake form, and then we usually start with sort of a kickoff overview call, where we talk about where their voice is now, talk about what their goals for whatever we're working on are, what it means in the larger ecosystem of their company, a little bit about their audience, kind of rehashing a little bit of what's in the intake form. But what we do on the first session is kind of talking about any disconnects, because 9 times out of 10, when you are an organization who wants to sound a specific way, you don't quite sound that specific way yet, especially if this is your first time hiring a copywriter. So we also talk about things like sort of what's missing, what seems to be going wrong, what are some brands with tones you like, even if they're in totally different industries, which is such a big one. And then there's also the subject of, how do your people really want to be spoken to? How do they want to be addressed? And that is so important. We're talking about this lens of the customer. It's one thing to be, if you are looking for, let's see, maybe it's like a company that sells meditation, or meditation or somebody that works with corporations doing wellness retreats and meditations like for teams. What is going to be most relevant to the head of HR? What is going to be most relevant to the people who are looking for this, who want to create this experience for their customers? Because if you come and how do you want them to sort of see you, and how do you want them to anticipate, what do you want them to anticipate the experience being like? So for example, if you come at them with a very like Sermon on the Mount tone, being like, hello, welcome to our peaceful space. Like
they're on the retreat.
Exactly. Yeah. That can be very attractive. What might be confusing if you are, to go back to the Rachel example, like, what up? We do meditation retreats for corporations. Like there's going to be a different kind of audience for those. And I think it's, if something more like a millennial company may like the latter, like a startup, whereas the older school corporations and the higher end folks are probably going to look for the former. And that is really interesting and it's really important to talk about. Oh, do you want to say something? Sorry. Don't let me monologue. Don't let me monologue. Oh God. But so that's a real joy of the process for me, a really essential element that I think a lot of writers sometimes forget. It's easy to neglect because you're thinking about the offer, product, or brand in terms of audience, problem, solution, right? But it's like audience, problem, audience thinks they have, problem, audience doesn't want to have anymore, goals of audience, way the goal and end result must be presented to audience, and then solution. So really it's about that interview process and really having those in-depth discussions. So for example, on my end, just back to my process, we'll usually do, if let's say we're doing a website, I will dedicate an entire hour call just to one page of the website each. So home, about, offerings page, each of them gets their own specific call for over an hour, where we really dig deep, because that gives me a chance to understand. And this all brings us back to like brand voice, and being good at it is really born not of being the cleverest or funniest or most creative person in the room. It comes from being the best listener and from doing the work to understand what the offer is, who it's for, where those people are coming from, and kind of how to string all those three together. And so we'll ask all the standard questions about the offer and the company. So stuff like, as we were talking about, pain points, goals, benefits, results, but also a really big one for brand voice, and this is actually my favorite question to ask around this, is how do you want people to feel? And not just how do you want people to feel, how do you want people to feel? Again, we'll stick with the website example. When they first land on your website, how do you want them to feel when they hit the buy button, like when they're investing in you and they're like getting those emails coming in, they're like, yeah, it's time. It's time. How do you want them to feel? And then how do you want them to feel right after the experience is over, when they've received their purchase and used it for the first time, when they've completed the program or the consulting session or service or whatever it is. Exactly. Yeah, right. And then 5 to 10 years into the future, looking back, how do you want them to feel? And it's surprising how much that influences voice and tone and the conversation that you have, because it can often change a conversation from one of, again, problem solution to one of, say, encouragement and reassurance and this whole discussion that, this is going to change everything for you, or you're not going to have to worry about this problem anymore. It really does shift the tone massively, and it's just another way to enhance brand voice.
I love that, especially because, it seems, from a writer's perspective, it seems very difficult, but it's almost like once you put each of those parameters into place, like you have, as you get further down the rabbit hole, it's almost impossible not to have their brand voice in it, because it is so specific. Like you make a turn at each of those points where the problem kind of, solves itself, like a Rubik's
exactly.
Cube.
And I love that you
really
brought
cool.
up. I love that you brought up that specificity thing too, because that's really what it's all about. And when you think about it in terms of like character voices, like dial 1-800-contacts is going to sound totally different coming from Bugs Bunny versus Elmer Fudd.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like when you think of it, it has a totally different effect. But I think that is the specificity, the purpose behind everything. Voice is such a powerful tool, and we ignore and neglect it at our peril, for sure. But it's such a joyful, creative challenge every single day doing the work that we do.
And I think I'm thinking so many things, because I just listened to your Ham Yaw episode on reviewing your websites and how terrible they were. And absolutely,
our first ever episode.
Absolutely, as a writer, I was so proud of myself to have figured out exactly what it is I give clients. Yes. And you press on the button. It was a picture of clouds, and in white font it said freedom. So if you can imagine being in the market for a B2B copywriter and clicking on a website with no other information besides the big word freedom. Thankfully, that only lasted like a month or two.
It may have worked though. You never know.
You never know.
Time to test it, but that's amazing. Yeah,
it was important in my evolution.
It is. You gotta. What's that saying? It's like every time I think about my first website, it's like there's that quote from, I think it's like Adventure Time, that show. It's like, don't worry, sucking at something is the first step to being pretty good at it. And I was like, oh, cool. But that's so true. And I think that's also another thing. I find that writers are often the most critical of themselves of like so many of the professions, most of the professions in marketing. And I think that's because that's the thing, like we somehow expect ourselves to come out of like the proverbial business womb, just like having it all figured out. And so that often paralyzes people into not starting, because they're like, it's not perfect, or I don't know everything. Or it gets people so obsessed with, saying just the right thing, they're changing their copy every 30 seconds, and they're not giving themselves time to sort of understand what's different and evolve. And it sounds like you give yourself full space to do that, which is the key.
Oh yeah.
And it's the same way, it's the same way for businesses too. And this is, voice isn't necessarily set in stone. Your personal voice as a writer is going to evolve for your own brand. And businesses will often evolve as well, which is why when someone approaches you for a brand voice guide or consultation, that it's not that they don't have a voice right now or something's necessarily wrong, but voice is part of evolution. When I do my creative direction work with clients as well, we talk about this a lot, because a lot of those clients are looking to kind of up-level their businesses and be seen as kind of higher end. So it's a question of how does that change the conversation while maintaining what made the brand great in the first place. And that is a really kind of fun party trick to be able to do. And it's just, again, just such a wonderful part of the process and the creative challenge of marketing and advertising.
Yeah, my gosh. And something that just came to me while you were talking, but I think that's got to in this whole conversation, I always come to this terrifying point where you think you've put brand voice into a first draft, and then they just edit the crap out of it, and it's all gone. But if you've gone through that extensive of a project where you've literally spent an hour talking about a web page, I feel like you've built so much trust at that point that those edits are going to, not come up at that point, so you're going to have a much better.
It does, but it gives you a lot of ammunition. They're like, well, why? Yes. It's like, but you said, I have it in recording, I have it on my notes, I have it, notarized, but, and it's so interesting because, and this is another thing, and I think, I actually learned this from my colleague Joel Kletke a couple of years ago, where I know he's the best. We love Joel.
He really is the best.
But what is a really great thing that he kind of taught me is doing a video walkthrough of your copy before you submit it using a tool like Loom. And when I do that, I can be like, here's why we're saying this, like here's the overall theory, versus I find that usually it wasn't so much of a problem with clients being like, what the hell is this? Because usually in the conversation I will say, like, we'll be talking and I'll mirror back like, hey, so what I'm hearing you say is this, which actually you did earlier in the podcast, which is a great practice. So I'm hearing you say this. So I get them to sign off on things basically, like before I put them down and try to implant them in their brain so they recognize them. But I find that offering that sort of walkthrough service does reduce the amount of edits if they know why you're doing certain things. You're not just throwing stuff at the wall for funsies. And it also kind of shows them your level of understanding of the brand. So it makes them feel really assured and usually does reduce the sheer number of edits as time goes on, because they're like, they can't really argue because they know exactly, like, well, I didn't like that you said this. It's like, well, this is a section I pulled directly from your own mouth. So what I would like to do, but yeah, so it's just an interesting tool to help clients feel seen, help them feel understood. Because at the end of the day, like they're looking for results, but they're also looking for a writer that really gets it and that they connect with. And that gives you an opportunity to kind of flex that muscle and save yourself, hopefully, a couple of editing rounds in the process.
Yeah, and I love that. I don't think we're name dropping to anybody who's listening.
We're name dropping.
We want to give credit to the geniuses that have impacted our processes. So my name is Ash Amberge, and when I first read her stuff about showing your work, so especially with a new client, sometimes I'll submit one just plain beautiful draft and one narrative draft where basically every paragraph I'm calling out 3 or 4 things and why I did them the way I did them and what an alternative might be, or what alternatives I've considered or whatever. Because I think walking through a white paper on Loom might be more painful for everyone involved than page copy. But if you give a white paper and there's 40 different comments explaining the choices you've made or different things that you could do with it, and then you could also just flip to this clean draft to read. All of that just really builds your authority and helps you prove that you're actually making choices, not just like slamming this out and moving on.
Exactly. And that builds that confidence and that connection. Actually, got to give credit where credit's due. Ashley, so years ago, in 2011 or 2010 even, like when I was just getting my start, she had this book out called You Don't Need a Job, You Need Guts, which is about creating, creating your own online business. And that's how I got my start. So all praise and love to Ashley for sure.
Yeah, her, probably the biggest travesty on the internet is that Brandgasm isn't available anymore, because that completely gave me everything I have for copywriting and design, whatever I can pretend to have. So and she has a new book out, so everybody go buy that, which is The Middle Finger Project. How to...
How to
never mind. That's not what it's called, but it's how to be un-F with a bowl. So it's not how to boop, just for
it's just one long swear. It's supposed to be a fabulous book and totally worth it.
Yeah, it's on my shelf, but it's taken time. So in the last couple minutes that we have, I thought I'd really love to. Man, there's so many good things. We kind of already talked about a lot. Man, you got to all my questions in advance. So maybe when it comes to great examples of these kind of style guides that maybe, as a writer, you might inherit from other people. Just one I wanted to share was Shopify's Polaris, if you're don't know how to say that word. And I'll have that in the notes somewhere, but it's basically a microsite of all of the design and all of the copy standards that they use.
Cool.
And it's really interesting to see how brands have thought through this when copy is important. And then HubSpot also has a list of 21 brands with either just their PDF or a microsite with that.
Very cool.
So that's pretty cool. So I think just in conclusion, I can thank you for being here because you've shared enormous amounts of wisdom with us.
Well, oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I wouldn't miss it.
And so I think as a kind of parting thought, when you're a writer and you feel like you've done a pretty good job with the brand voice, do you have any thoughts on how you can review a document and kind of check and make sure you've accomplished your goal?
Absolutely. So I think it's really a matter of understanding, also going through it with the client if you can, what these things mean. And examples sort of in their existing copy. So that makes it easier to kind of draw the line. But I think when you go through something like a brand voice outline, it really is, it's easy to get kind of obsessed and to be like, okay, this all has to be perfect. And it's not in line. If it's not in line, like, we destroy it. One piece of advice that I would give to writers is, refer to the guide, have the interviews, have the discussion, refer to the guide again before you start writing, and then put it away. Because what you need is you're not a brain surgeon. You don't need to be like, not everything has to be like perfect line drawn from here to here. But using the knowledge that you have, your notes, your understanding of the brand, you will create something that's almost guaranteed to be in line if you've done your homework. And then using the voice guide after, again, not to fact check, not to be like, am I doing all these notes? Am I doing all this correctly? Because you're going to remember the big stuff, right? Like, you're going to remember the nature of the tone. You're going to remember the experience that people want to create. But just going back and forth and making sure if there are many sort of guidelines like no swearing, or stuff like we don't use this word, we use this word. That's what you want to sort of focus on. But other than that, just making sure the tone is right, making sure the conversation you're having is the correct conversation, making sure you're skewing more positive than negative. I know clients sometimes can be pretty picky about that. Yeah. But your brain's going to do most of the work for you. And if something doesn't feel totally in line, if you're not sure about something, ask the client. The client will know. I think we always expect things to be perfect, but especially first drafts, there has to be a little bit of wiggle room to, make changes and understand. And if you ask the client, explain sort of where you're getting stuck, they can, again, see your work. They can understand your thought process, and hopefully they can guide you across the finish line.
Yeah, and just so much on building that relationship where it's almost better for them to have an edit so that they can see how great you are at fielding edits and listening. Because that, it just, how to not make that a humble brag.
Humble brag.
When I get a compliment, it's often around being so pleasant with edits. Exactly. Some writing, like, you can get so much attitude, and I feel the attitude and I roll my eyes, but when I'm responding, it's all open for comments.
Professional, baby.
Yeah, it makes you so much easier to work with.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. Oh, can I come back?
Yes.